My name is Avery Mitchell, and at 28, I've built a life most would envy. But 15 years ago, I was just a confused 13-year-old girl whose parents decided they no longer wanted the burden of raising a child after their messy divorce. My salvation came in the form of my wealthy Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie, who welcomed me into their home and hearts when my own parents abandoned me. Now, after 15 years of silence, my parents have suddenly reappeared, but their motives are far from pure. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Before everything fell apart, I remember having what seemed like a perfect childhood. My mom, Natalie, was vibrant and creative, always organizing neighborhood events or designing our home's interior. My dad, Brian, worked in commercial real estate development and brought home enough money for us to live comfortably in a nice suburban neighborhood in Connecticut. We had Sunday pancake traditions, summer vacations to beach towns, and holiday celebrations that filled our photo albums with smiling faces. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. The first cracks appeared when I was around 10 years old. I started noticing the strain between my parents, conversations that would abruptly end when I entered a room, forced smiles during family dinners, and increasing periods of silence that stretched uncomfortably across our once lively home. Dad started coming home later and later, claiming work demands, while Mom threw herself into community projects, barely acknowledging his absence. By the time I turned 11, the arguments had become impossible to hide. They'd wait until they thought I was asleep, but their raised voices would seep through my bedroom walls. I'd lie awake, pillow pressed against my ears, trying not to hear Mom accusing Dad of neglect and financial irresponsibility, or Dad shouting back about Mom's extravagant spending and emotional distance. "You're driving us into bankruptcy with your failed projects," Mom would scream. "And you're draining our accounts with your redecorating obsession," Dad would counter. I later learned that Dad's business had been struggling for years. A major development project had fallen through, leaving him with massive debt. Meanwhile, Mom had been compensating for her unhappiness by spending beyond their means, creating a perfect storm of financial and emotional distress. The night everything changed started like any other tense evening in our household. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when they called me into the living room. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, a physical manifestation of the gulf between them. "Avery, your father and I need to talk to you," Mom began, her voice artificially steady. "We've decided to get a divorce." Though I'd sensed it coming, hearing the words spoken aloud still felt like being doused with ice water. I nodded numbly, unable to form words as they outlined their plans in the detached manner of business partners dissolving a company rather than parents concerned about their child's well-being. The shock came when they began discussing what would happen to me. "Your mother doesn't think she can manage raising you alone while rebuilding her life," Dad said, pointing the blame squarely at Mom. "And your father claims he'll be traveling too much for work to provide a stable home," Mom countered, her eyes narrowing. They spoke about me as if I were a piece of furniture they were deciding how to dispose of during the division of assets. Not once did either of them say they wanted me. Instead, they presented the idea of sending me to live with my Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie, temporarily, while they sorted out their lives. Uncle James was my mother's older brother, a successful investment banker who lived with his wife Stephanie in a sprawling home about an hour away. They had no children of their own, having focused on their careers and philanthropic work instead. "It will just be for a few weeks," Mom assured me, not meeting my eyes. "Until we get everything settled." 2 days later, I found myself standing in Uncle James's marble-floored foyer with 2 hastily packed suitcases and my backpack, watching my parents' car disappear down the long driveway. Mom had kissed my cheek briefly, while Dad had given me an awkward side hug, both promising to call soon. The first month, I received a few perfunctory phone calls. Mom had found a small apartment and was reinventing herself. Dad was pursuing opportunities on the West Coast. Both conversations revolved around their new beginnings, with little inquiry about how I was adjusting. By the second month, the calls had dwindled to occasional texts. By the third month, even those had become rare. Uncle James made discreet inquiries about their plans for me, only to be met with vague responses about needing more time. The devastating moment of clarity came 6 months after I'd been left with my aunt and uncle. It was my 14th birthday, and I'd been clinging to the hope that my parents would at least show up for that. Instead, I received 2 separate cards in the mail, Mom's postmarked from France, Dad's from California. Neither contained any mention of when they might return for me. Instead, Mom wrote about her spiritual awakening in Europe, while Dad referenced a promising business venture with a tech startup. Uncle James sat me down that evening after I'd opened the cards and tried to hide my disappointment. "Avery," he said gently, his kind eyes holding mine, "I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's happening. Your parents, they're not coming back anytime soon." "They said it would just be a few weeks," I whispered, though I'd already begun to suspect the truth. "I know, and I'm so sorry. But it seems they've both decided to pursue new lives that don't include the responsibilities of parenthood." His directness, though painful, was actually a relief after months of uncertainty. That night, I cried myself to sleep, finally mourning the family I'd lost and facing the reality of my abandonment. My parents hadn't just divorced each other, they had divorced me as well, discarding their daughter as easily as they'd discarded their marriage vows. Over the following months, communication became even more sporadic. I learned through Uncle James that my mother had met a wealthy Frenchman and was traveling throughout Europe with him, while my father had relocated to Silicon Valley, chasing the next big investment opportunity. Neither mentioned plans to reclaim their daughter. Birthday and Christmas cards arrived with generic messages and no return addresses, as if they wanted to ensure I couldn't reach out to them. By the time I turned 15, I had accepted the painful truth. I had been abandoned by the 2 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. In their pursuit of freedom from their failed marriage, they had also sought freedom from their child. The temporary arrangement had become my permanent reality, and I was left to rebuild my life with the help of an uncle and aunt who, thankfully, proved to be far more dedicated to my well-being than my own parents had been. Moving in with Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie was like stepping into another world. One where adults actually kept their promises and showed up consistently. Their home was a far cry from the modest suburban house where I'd grown up. Located in an exclusive neighborhood, the Georgian-style mansion sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds with a pool, tennis court, and even a small guest house where the groundskeeper lived. Uncle James, at 52, was tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair and a calm demeanor that made everyone in his presence feel at ease. As a senior partner at a prestigious investment firm in the city, he commanded respect in financial circles, but never brought the stress of his work home. Aunt Stephanie, 5 years his junior, had retired early from a successful career as a corporate attorney to focus on her true passion, philanthropy. She sat on the boards of several nonprofits and hosted fundraising events that were highlights of the social calendar. Despite their wealth and status, what struck me most about them was their genuine warmth. Unlike the increasingly cold atmosphere of my parents' home in the years before their divorce, Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's house radiated a sense of harmony. They actually enjoyed being together, engaging in thoughtful conversations over dinner, laughing at inside jokes, and supporting each other's interests. Their childlessness had never been by choice. After years of fertility treatments and 2 devastating miscarriages, they had made peace with building a life without children. When I arrived, they channeled all that unused parental love toward me, though they were careful not to overwhelm me during those first fragile months. My adjustment wasn't easy. I suffered from abandonment nightmares where I'd wake up screaming, convinced I was being left behind again. During the day, I'd obsessively check my phone for messages from my parents that rarely came. I developed anxiety about being late for anything, fearing that tardiness would give Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie a reason to discard me too. Uncle James approached my emotional struggles with remarkable patience. Rather than dismissing my fears or telling me to get over it, he would sit with me during my anxiety attacks, his steady presence an anchor until the storm passed. "Your feelings are valid, Avery," he would tell me. "What happened to you wasn't fair, and it's okay to be angry and hurt. but I want you to know that this home is yours for as long as you want it. We're not going anywhere." Aunt Stephanie's approach was more practical, but equally supportive. She enrolled me in a prestigious private school where I could make a fresh start, arranged for me to see Dr. Wilson, a child psychologist specializing in abandonment trauma, and encouraged me to try different activities to discover new passions. "The best revenge is living well," she told me one evening after I'd received a particularly empty birthday text from my mother. "You can't control their choices, but you can build a life so fulfilling that their absence becomes irrelevant." Under their guidance, I slowly began to heal. The therapy sessions with Dr. Wilson helped me understand that my parents' abandonment reflected their own deep flaws, not my worthiness of love. At school, I gradually formed friendships with classmates who didn't know my history and therefore didn't treat me with the pitying glances I'd endured from neighbors in our old community. Katie, a thoughtful girl with a passion for literature, became my closest friend after we bonded over our shared love of Jane Austen in English class. Zoe, with her vibrant personality and talent for art, pulled me into her creative world, encouraging me to express my emotions through painting. And then there was Daniel, the kind-hearted debate team captain who never failed to make me laugh even on my darkest days. With this growing support system, I began to thrive. My natural academic abilities, which had been overshadowed by the drama of my parents' deteriorating marriage, emerged as I earned top grades. Uncle James noticed my aptitude for mathematics and economics and began including me in conversations about investments and financial markets during our evening discussions. "You have a natural mind for strategy," he commented one night after I'd correctly predicted a market shift he'd been tracking. "That's not something that can be taught." Aunt Stephanie, meanwhile, nurtured my developing interest in psychology and social justice, inviting me to accompany her to benefit events and introducing me to people working in fields that aligned with my interests. "Connections matter," she would explain, "but what you do with those connections matters more. Use them to create positive change." What struck me most profoundly about life with my aunt and uncle was the consistency. When they said they would attend my school events, they showed up. When they promised we would discuss a topic later, we actually did. When they established rules, they enforced them fairly and explained their reasoning. This reliability was a stark contrast to the chaos of my parents' household, where promises were easily made and just as easily broken. By the end of my sophomore year, I had stopped jumping every time my phone buzzed with a notification, no longer expecting it to be a message from my parents. The nightmares had subsided, and I'd stopped referring to my bedroom at Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's house as the room I'm staying in, finally accepting it as my own space. On the night of my 16th birthday, after a celebration with my new friends and a special dinner prepared by their personal chef, Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie presented me with an unexpected gift: adoption papers. "We would be honored to make official what we already feel in our hearts," Uncle James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're our daughter in every way that matters, Avery. But we'll completely understand if you're not ready or if this isn't what you want." I stared at the papers, a complex rush of emotions washing over me. Signing them would feel like a final acknowledgement that my biological parents were truly gone from my life. But looking up at the two people who had shown me what unconditional love actually meant, I realized that family isn't determined by blood, but by choice, by who chooses to stay, to support, to love consistently. "I would like that very much," I finally said, tears streaming down my face as Aunt Stephanie enveloped me in a warm embrace while Uncle James squeezed my shoulder gently. That night marked the beginning of my new life, not as the abandoned daughter of Natalie and Brian Mitchell, but as the cherished child of James and Stephanie Carson, who had chosen me when my own parents wouldn't. High school became a time of transformation for me. With the stability provided by Uncle James, now legally my father, and Aunt Stephanie, now my mother, I was able to focus on discovering who I wanted to be, rather than dwelling on who had left me behind. Academically, I flourished. My natural aptitude for mathematics and analysis evolved into a passion for economics and business strategy. I joined the debate team, where I developed confidence in articulating my ideas, and the Student Investment Club, where I could apply the financial concepts Uncle James had been teaching me. The key to success isn't just understanding the numbers, he would explain during our evening discussions in his home office. It's understanding the psychology behind market movements, why people make the decisions they do with their money. These lessons extended beyond theoretical discussions. On my 17th birthday, Uncle James set up a small investment portfolio for me, providing an initial sum but making it clear that the decisions about how to invest it would be mine. "You'll make mistakes," he warned with a smile. "That's part of the learning process. But better to make them now with relatively small amounts than later when the stakes are higher." He was right. My first few investment choices resulted in modest losses, but with his guidance, I analyzed what had gone wrong and adjusted my strategy. By the end of my junior year, my portfolio had not only recovered but grown by 12%, a fact I took more pride in than almost any of my academic achievements. Aunt Stephanie's influence was equally significant, but in different areas. She introduced me to her network of philanthropic connections, showing me how wealth could be leveraged for social good. Through her, I learned about nonprofit management, effective altruism, and the importance of addressing systemic issues rather than just symptoms. "Money is merely a tool," she would say. "What matters is how skillfully you use it to create the world you want to live in." Under her mentorship, I started a program at our school that paired economically disadvantaged elementary students with high school tutors, securing funding from local businesses to provide educational materials and healthy snacks. The initiative earned recognition from the school board and was eventually adopted by other schools in the district. My social life blossomed as well. Katie, Zoe, and Daniel remained my core friend group, but our circle expanded to include others drawn to our diverse interests and supportive dynamic. Weekend study sessions at our house often evolved into impromptu pool parties or movie nights, filling the mansion with the laughter and energy that Aunt Stephanie said had been missing before my arrival. Junior year brought another significant change when I was elected class president. The shy, traumatized 13-year-old who had arrived at Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's doorstep had evolved into a confident young woman whom peers looked to for leadership. Dr. Wilson, who I continued to see monthly for maintenance therapy, noted that my resilience had become my defining characteristic. "You've turned your wound into wisdom," she observed during one session. Not everyone manages to do that. Many people remain defined by their trauma rather than using it as a catalyst for growth. As graduation approached, I found myself at the top of my class. The girl who had once feared being unwanted was now being courted by multiple Ivy League universities. With Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's support, both emotional and financial, I accepted an offer from Princeton, where I planned to major in economics with a minor in psychology. The graduation ceremony was a moment of triumph tinged with reflection. As I delivered the valedictorian address to my classmates and their families, I couldn't help but notice the empty seats where biological parents might have sat. But when I looked instead to the front row where Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie beamed with pride, I felt only gratitude for the family I had found. College presented new challenges and opportunities. The rigorous academic environment pushed me to develop stronger study habits and time management skills. I joined the Women in Business Association and the Socially Responsible Investment Fund, which aligned with the values instilled by my adoptive parents. Though I maintained regular contact with my high school friends, I also formed new connections, including several professors who became important mentors. It was during junior year that I met Michael Reynolds, a graduate student in the business school who was teaching assistant for my advanced financial markets course. Our relationship began professionally. He provided invaluable feedback on my research project analyzing ethical investment strategies, but gradually evolved into friendship and eventually romance. Michael shared my interest in using business as a force for positive change. The son of self-made entrepreneurs who had built a sustainable energy company, he understood both privilege and purpose in ways that resonated with me. He was also unfailingly supportive of my ambitions, never treating my career goals as secondary to his own. After graduation, where I received honors for my thesis on psychological factors affecting market volatility during economic crises, I accepted a position at Crawford and Associates, a consulting firm specializing in corporate strategy. The role allowed me to apply both my analytical skills and psychological insights, helping companies navigate complex transitions while considering their social impact. My early 20s became a period of professional growth and personal stability. I advanced quickly at the firm, earning a reputation for innovative approaches to client challenges. Michael and I maintained our relationship, supporting each other's careers while building a life together. We moved into a comfortable apartment in the city, close enough to visit Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie for regular Sunday dinners, but establishing our independence. At 26, another milestone arrived when Michael proposed during a weekend trip to the Berkshires. The antique emerald ring had belonged to his grandmother, and as he slipped it onto my finger, I felt a sense of belonging that once seemed impossible for the abandoned 13-year-old I had been. "You've shown me what real love looks like," he said as we celebrated with champagne by a lakeside sunset. "I want to build a family with you, one where everyone feels as valued and supported as you've made me feel." His words struck a deep chord. Family. Once a concept associated with pain and rejection, it now represented possibility and choice. With Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's loving example and my own hard-won wisdom, I felt prepared to create the kind of family bonds that would never break. As we began planning our wedding, scheduled for the following spring, I felt satisfied with the life I had built from the ashes of abandonment. At 28, I had a fulfilling career, a loving partner, supportive adoptive parents, and genuine friendships. The absence of my biological parents had become a distant ache rather than a defining wound. But just as I was finalizing details for what promised to be the happiest day of my life, the past I thought I had outgrown came rushing back with unexpected force. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning as I was reviewing client files before a meeting. The subject line, "Your mother reaching out," nearly caused me to spill my coffee across my keyboard. For a moment, I thought it might be from Aunt Stephanie, but the unfamiliar address made my heart race with a combination of dread and disbelief. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. "Dearest Avery, asterisk. I know it's been far too long since we've spoken. 15 years of silence is inexcusable, and I won't pretend otherwise. I've thought about you every day and have followed your accomplishments from afar through occasional updates from mutual acquaintances, asterisk. Life has taken me down many paths since we last saw each other, some fulfilling, others challenging. I've made many mistakes, but none greater than walking away from you. The pain of our separation has grown more acute with time rather than diminishing, asterisk. I recently learned about your engagement through a social media post shared by one of your high school friends. The beautiful young woman in those photos bears little resemblance to the girl I left behind, and I realize how much of your life I've missed by my own terrible choice, asterisk. I'm back in the States now and would be grateful for the opportunity to see you, to apologize in person, and perhaps begin the long process of making amends if you're willing. I understand if this is unwelcome or if the timing feels disruptive as you plan your wedding, asterisk. Please know that I expect nothing. I only hope for a chance to express my profound regret face-to-face and to tell you that despite my unconscionable actions, I have always loved you, asterisk. With deepest remorse and hope, asterisk. Natalie, Mom, asterisk. I read the message 3 times, emotions cycling between shock, anger, curiosity, and suspicion. After 15 years of near-complete silence, interrupted only by occasional impersonal birthday or holiday cards, my mother wanted to reconnect now, just months before my wedding to Michael? The timing felt too convenient to be coincidental. I forwarded the email to Dr. Wilson, then called Michael, who immediately offered to come to my office. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he assured me, his voice a calming presence through the phone. "Take time to process this. Whatever you decide, I'm with you completely." That evening, still reeling from my mother's unexpected outreach, I drove to Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's home. They listened quietly as I shared the email's contents, their expressions shifting between concern and carefully contained anger. "There's something else you should know," Uncle James said after I finished speaking. "Your father contacted me last week." My jaw dropped. "Dad reached out too? After all this time?" Uncle James nodded grimly. He called my office. Said he was hoping to reconnect with you, but wasn't sure if contacting you directly would be welcome. He asked if I would facilitate a meeting. What did you tell him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I told him that you're an adult capable of making your own decisions, and that if he wanted to reach out, he should do so directly rather than using me as an intermediary. Uncle James's tone softened. I also told him that if his intentions weren't completely genuine, he should reconsider opening old wounds. Aunt Stephanie reached for my hand across the kitchen island. Avery, there's something strange about both of your parents suddenly reappearing at the same time after 15 years of absence. Especially with your wedding approaching, Uncle James added, his investment banker's analytical mind clearly working through potential motivations. Has either of them mentioned knowing about your engagement? Mom said she saw it on social media through a mutual friend, I confirmed. Dad hasn't contacted me yet, but if he knew to call your office, he must have been keeping tabs on me somehow. Over dinner, we pieced together what little information we had. Through discreet inquiries within his business network, Uncle James had learned that my father's much-touted Silicon Valley venture had collapsed spectacularly the previous year, leaving him with substantial debt. Meanwhile, my mother's European adventure had apparently ended when her relationship with the wealthy Frenchman dissolved, forcing her return to the States with depleted resources. I hate to suggest this, Aunt Stephanie said carefully, but their simultaneous reappearance when both are facing financial difficulties and you're about to marry into the Reynolds family, whose clean energy company was recently valued at over $2 billion, Uncle James finished. The implication hung heavy in the air. After abandoning me for 15 years, my parents might now see me as a potential financial resource, a connection to wealth through both my adoptive family and my future in-laws. We could be wrong, Aunt Stephanie added quickly. Perhaps facing difficult times has genuinely led them to reevaluate their priorities and past mistakes. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it aligned too perfectly with the patterns of self-interest they had shown throughout my childhood. The parents who had once discarded me as an inconvenient burden were now reaching out just as I was connecting to another wealthy family through marriage. The next morning, my suspicions were further confirmed when my father finally made direct contact. His email was less emotional than my mother's, but equally focused on reconciliation, and included a reference to a business opportunity he was eager to discuss with me. After consulting again with Dr. Wilson, who cautioned me to protect my emotional well-being while satisfying my need for closure, I made my decision. I would meet with both parents separately, establish clear boundaries, and determine their true motivations before deciding whether they deserved any place in my life or my upcoming wedding. Remember that you hold the power in this situation, Dr. Wilson advised. You're no longer the vulnerable child they abandoned. You're a strong, successful woman with agency and choice. With that reminder fortifying my resolve, I replied to both emails, setting up meetings for the following week. My mother at a cafe near my office on Tuesday, my father at a restaurant of my choosing on Thursday. I deliberately selected public venues to minimize the potential for emotional manipulation and ensure I could leave easily if necessary. As the meetings approached, I fluctuated between anxiety and a strange sense of empowerment. The 13-year-old girl in me still yearned for parental love and approval, but the woman I had become understood that I no longer needed either to validate my worth. Whatever their motivations for returning to my life, I would face my parents on my terms, not theirs. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that usually lifted my spirits. But as I dressed for both work and my impending reunion with my mother, my stomach churned with apprehension. I chose my outfit deliberately, a tailored charcoal suit that projected confidence and professionalism, paired with the pearl earrings Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie had given me for my college graduation. These physical reminders of my strength and support system would serve as armor for the emotional battle ahead. Michael kissed me goodbye at our apartment door. "Remember who you are," he said softly. "Not who they abandoned, but who you've become despite them." The cafe I'd selected was upscale, but not ostentatious, located in a busy business district where I could easily return to work afterward. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that gave me a view of the entrance while allowing enough privacy for our conversation. At precisely noon, she walked in. Natalie Mitchell, or whatever her surname might be now after her European adventures, had aged in the 15 years since I'd last seen her. Her once vibrant auburn hair, so similar to my own, now showed strands of gray despite obvious coloring attempts. Fine lines surrounded her eyes and mouth, and her posture carried a weariness that hadn't been present in my memories. Yet she was still striking, dressed in a way that suggested an attempt at projecting affluence despite limited means, designer items from several seasons past mixed with contemporary fast fashion. Her eyes darted around the cafe before landing on me, widening with recognition that quickly morphed into a teary smile. I remained seated as she approached, unwilling to rise for the embrace she clearly intended to initiate. "Avery," she breathed, her voice catching as she stood awkwardly beside the table. "You're so beautiful. So grown up." 15 years will do that, I replied evenly, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please sit down." She complied, her hands fidgeting with her purse. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But I decided some conversations are better had in person." A server appeared, and we both ordered a simple black coffee for me, an elaborate specialty latte with modifiers for her. The contrast wasn't lost on me. She still approached life looking for customization and special treatment. Once we were alone again, my mother launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech about regret and missed opportunities. She spoke of her journey of self-discovery through Europe, her relationships with various men. The Frenchman had been just one of several, and her eventual realization that material pursuits had left her spiritually empty. "It took losing everything to understand what really matters," she said, reaching across the table toward my hand, which I subtly withdrew. "Family. Connection. The bonds that sustain us through life's challenges." "Interesting that you mention bonds," I replied. "Those usually require maintenance to remain strong." 15 years of near silence doesn't suggest much interest in maintaining connection. Her expression faltered momentarily before she recovered. "I deserve that." "I know I do." My silence was complicated. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that once I found my footing, I'd come back for you. Then as months turned into years, shame kept me away. How could I face you after such abandonment? What could I possibly say to explain the inexcusable? There was something practiced about her contrition, the perfect glistening tear at the corner of her eye, the vulnerable tilt of her head. I'd seen this performance before when she wanted something from my father during their marriage. "And yet here you are," I observed. "What changed?" "I've been in therapy," she replied quickly. "Working through my own childhood trauma, understanding how it influenced my choices as a mother. I realize now that I never learned how to be a parent because my own were so deficient." While her words hit familiar therapeutic beats, they felt hollow explanations rather than genuine accountability. As she continued speaking, her narrative began shifting subtly from apology to her current circumstances. "Life hasn't been kind lately," she confessed, her voice dropping dramatically. "The economic situation in Europe became untenable. Pierre, the man I was with for several years, turned out to be less financially stable than he'd presented. When things ended, I found myself starting over again at 53 with few resources. And there it was, the pivot I'd been expecting. Within 20 minutes of reuniting with her daughter after 15 years, my mother was already laying groundwork for financial assistance." "That sounds challenging," I replied neutrally. "What are your plans now that you're back in the States?" She brightened, seemingly encouraged by my question. "I have several entrepreneurial ideas. My time in France gave me connections in the wine and luxury goods markets. With the right investment, I could establish an import business catering to high-end clients." "Investment," I repeated. "And where would that come from?" Her eyes flickered momentarily. "There are options. Small business loans, finding the right partner. I do have valuable expertise and connections to contribute." The conversation continued in this vein, her alternating between emotional appeals about our lost relationship and increasingly transparent hints about her financial precarity. When she mentioned hearing about my impressive career achievements and my upcoming marriage to the Reynolds heir, any lingering doubt about her motivations vanished. "How exactly did you hear about my engagement?" I asked directly. "You mentioned social media in your email." She hesitated just a fraction too long. "One of your high school friends, I believe her name is Zoe, posted congratulations. It appeared in my feed somehow. I knew this was impossible. Zoe maintained strict privacy settings, and my mother had never been connected to my friend group on any platform." The lie confirmed my suspicions. "Mom," I said, using the term deliberately to observe her reaction, "why are you really here? After 15 years of minimal contact, why reach out now?" Her eyes welled with fresh tears. "Because I miss my daughter. Because life is short and full of regrets, and I don't want to die someday knowing I never tried to make amends for my greatest mistake." The words were right, but the performance lacked authenticity. When I didn't immediately respond with sympathy, she switched tactics. "I understand your suspicion, Avery. I've given you every reason to doubt me. But is it so hard to believe that a mother might genuinely want to reconnect with her child? That losing everything might clarify what truly matters." "It's not hard to believe," I replied calmly. "What's difficult to reconcile is the timing. You reappeared just as I'm about to marry into a wealthy family, simultaneously with my father making similar overtures, when both of you are facing financial difficulties. Surely you can understand how that appears." Color rose in her cheeks. "You think I'm after your fiancé's money? That this is some kind of calculated scheme?" "I think you're someone who abandoned her child when that child became inconvenient to your personal plans," I stated flatly. "So yes, I question your motives when you reappear at a time that seems potentially advantageous to you." Her expression hardened briefly before melting into hurt. "I made a terrible mistake, Avery. One I will regret until my dying day. But is there no possibility of redemption? No path to forgiveness?" "Forgiveness isn't something owed," I said quietly. "It's earned through consistent action and genuine remorse. A single conversation can erase 15 years of absence." As our meeting concluded, she pressed a business card into my hand with her contact information, making one final emotional appeal about hoping to be part of my life again, perhaps even attending your wedding, if you'd find that healing. I left the cafe emotionally drained, but clearer about the situation. My mother's performance had confirmed what Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie had suspected. Her return was at least partially motivated by financial interest. Thursday's meeting with my father proved even more revealing. Brian Mitchell had aged more visibly than my mother, his once athletic frame now softened with middle age, his hairline receded, deep lines etched around his mouth suggesting years of stress. He arrived at the restaurant in business attire that, like my mother's outfit, hinted at an attempt to project success despite limited resources. Unlike my mother's emotional approach, my father opted for false camaraderie, greeting me with forced joviality as if we were old friends who'd simply lost touch rather than a father who had abandoned his teenage daughter. "There she is." The financial whiz kid, he exclaimed too loudly while sliding into the booth across from me. "James must be proud, following in his footsteps at Crawford and Associates. I always knew you had a head for business." "You can't know much about me at all," I replied evenly. "We haven't spoken meaningfully in 15 years. His smile faltered momentarily. "Fair point. Direct and to the point, another quality you get from me." I didn't bother correcting his presumption that any of my positive traits could be attributed to him rather than to the people who had actually raised me. Instead, I asked simply, "Why did you want to meet Dad?" He sighed dramatically, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, I know I haven't been Father of the Year. The divorce, the business failures, the need to rebuild on the West Coast, it all created a perfect storm that made it impossible to be the parent you deserved." Impossible, I repeated. Interesting word choice. Many single parents manage to raise children despite difficult circumstances. Many divorced couples co-parent successfully. What made your situation uniquely impossible? He shifted uncomfortably. I'm not here to make excuses, Avery. I'm here because life has a way of teaching hard lessons, and one of mine has been recognizing what really matters. Success, money, it all means nothing without family. This platitude, so similar to my mother's, rang equally hollow. As he continued, the conversation followed a pattern disturbingly parallel to Tuesday's meeting. After brief, superficial inquiries about my life, he launched into his own saga of business ventures, setbacks, and most recently, a health scare that had put everything in perspective. The doctors found a small spot on my lung, he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Benign, thankfully, but it was a wake-up call. Made me realize I needed to reconnect with what matters, with who matters. I'm glad you're healthy, I replied sincerely. Health scares can indeed be clarifying. He nodded eagerly. Exactly. And it got me thinking about legacy. About what I'm leaving behind. Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you. A business opportunity I'm developing. And there it was, even more direct than my mother's approach. He proceeded to outline a real estate venture targeting sustainable housing developments, emphasizing its profit potential while highlighting his need for initial investors. With your financial background and my experience in development, we could make an incredible team, he enthused. Father-daughter business partners. And the timing couldn't be better with the connections you've built at Crawford and through your fiancé's family. The naked opportunism was almost impressive in its boldness. When I didn't immediately express enthusiasm, he pivoted to emotional manipulation. This could be our chance to rebuild what was lost, Avery. To work together, to create something meaningful as a family. Isn't that worth considering? The conversation deteriorated further when I asked pointed questions about his business plan, revealing substantial gaps in market research and financial projections. His growing frustration culminated in a comment that exposed his true character. I thought you'd be more supportive, he said, unable to hide his disappointment. After all, James Carson set you up with every advantage. The least you could do is help your real father get back on his feet. My real father. I repeated, anger finally breaking through my composed exterior. A real father doesn't abandon his child when his marriage ends. A real father doesn't disappear for 15 years and then return only when he needs money. His expression hardened. So that's it? No forgiveness? No second chances? Second chances require genuine remorse and changed behavior, I said, echoing what I'd told my mother. Not just words when you want something from me. As I prepared to leave, having declined to invest in his venture, he played his final card. I've been in touch with your mother, you know. She mentioned you two had met. I froze. You've been in contact with Mom. We've reconnected recently, he admitted. Shared experiences, shared regrets about how things happened with you. We were thinking maybe the three of us could get together sometime, like a family reunion of sorts. The revelation that my parents, who had fought bitterly during their divorce and claimed to despise each other, were now in communication confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't about reconnection or remorse. It was a coordinated effort to exploit my position and connections. I need to go, I said, gathering my belongings. This meeting has been informative. Think about what I said, Avery, he called as I walked away. Family should help family. It's what decent people do. His parting guilt trip solidified my resolve. The people who had abandoned me were now attempting to manipulate me for financial gain, coordinating their efforts while pretending their simultaneous reappearance was coincidental. The 13-year-old girl in me who had longed for her parents' return finally accepted the painful truth. The people I had hoped they might become existed only in my childhood imagination. As I left the restaurant, my phone buzzed with a text from Uncle James. Everything okay? For years earlier, I had activated location sharing with him and Aunt Stephanie during a solo trip abroad, and we had never turned it off, not out of surveillance concerns but from mutual care. Coming home, I replied, suddenly needing the comfort of the people who had actually shown me what family truly meant. We need to talk. The revelation of my parents' coordinated manipulation hit harder than I had anticipated. Despite 15 years of building a successful life without them, despite the family I had found with Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie, despite the future I was creating with Michael, Some childish part of me had still harbored hope that my biological parents might someday return with genuine love and remorse. That evening, I collapsed on the sofa in Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's living room, emotionally exhausted after recounting the details of both meetings. Michael sat beside me, his hand steady on mine, while my adoptive parents listened with expressions that shifted between concern, anger, and sorrow. "I feel so stupid," I confessed when I'd finished. Part of me actually believed they might have changed, that they might actually care about reconnecting with me as a person rather than as a potential resource. "That doesn't make you stupid," Aunt Stephanie said firmly. "It makes you human." Hope is one of our most persistent instincts, especially when it comes to parental love. Uncle James nodded. "The fact that you were open to the possibility of reconciliation speaks to your character, not your intelligence. You gave them an opportunity they didn't deserve." "What bothers me most," Michael added, "is their coordination. The fact that they've been in contact, planning this approach while pretending their simultaneous reappearance was coincidental. It's calculated in a way that feels almost predatory." The word struck me. Predatory. My parents had identified me as a potential target, a successful daughter with valuable connections, and had coordinated their approach to maximize their chances of extracting financial benefit. The realization triggered a panic attack unlike any I'd experienced in years. "I can't breathe," I gasped, my heart racing as tears blurred my vision. I thought I was past this. I thought I'd healed. Michael immediately recognized what was happening, having witnessed a similar episode during our early dating days when a random encounter with a woman who resembled my mother had triggered old trauma. He guided me through the breathing exercises Dr. Wilson had taught me, while Aunt Stephanie brought a glass of water and Uncle James called my therapist directly. Dr. Wilson made room in her schedule for an emergency session the following morning. In her calming office, surrounded by the familiar plants and soft lighting that had witnessed so much of my healing journey, I processed the events of the week. "What you're experiencing is a very normal response to re-traumatization," she explained. "For years, you've worked through the abandonment by your parents. Now they've reappeared in a way that confirms your worst fears about their character, that they discarded you when you were a burden and only want you now because you might be valuable to them." "Exactly," I whispered. "It's like they've validated every negative thought I ever had about my worth to them. But that reflects on them, not on you," Dr. Wilson reminded me. "Their behavior demonstrates their character flaws, not your value as a person." Over the next hour, we worked through strategies for moving forward. Dr. Wilson emphasized that I had choices. I could cut contact completely, establish limited conditional contact, or try to build a new relationship with clear boundaries. The decision was mine to make based on what would best protect my mental health and well-being. "You're not that powerless 13-year-old anymore," she reminded me. "You have agency now. You decide the terms of any relationship moving forward." That concept, agency, became my touchstone as I developed a plan for addressing my parents' return. With input from Michael, Uncle James, Aunt Stephanie, and Dr. Wilson, I drafted a set of conditions for any future relationship with either of my biological parents. 1. Acknowledgement of the abandonment without excuses or deflection. 2. Individual therapy for both of them to address their patterns of self-centered behavior. 3. Commitment to respect boundaries I established without manipulation. 4. No financial requests or business propositions for a minimum of 2 years. 5. Limited, supervised contact initially to rebuild trust gradually. I composed emails to both of them outlining these conditions, making it clear that any future relationship would be contingent on their acceptance of these terms. My message was firm but not vengeful. I wasn't seeking to punish them, but to protect myself while leaving the door slightly open for genuine change if they were capable of it. Their responses arrived within hours of each other, revealing much about their characters. My mother's reply was emotional and defensive, positioning herself as the victim of my harsh judgment, while simultaneously claiming to understand my perspective. She agreed to the conditions, but with qualifiers about her financial situation making therapy difficult to afford right now, a transparent attempt to elicit an offer to pay for her counseling. My father's response was more overtly hostile. He accused me of being brainwashed by James Carson's wealth and forgetting where I came from. His email oscillated between angry defiance, "I don't need to jump through hoops for my own daughter," and manipulative guilt-tripping, "This is how you treat your father after everything I sacrificed for you." He rejected the conditions outright, stating that real family doesn't come with terms and conditions. Their reactions, while painful, confirmed I had made the right decision in establishing firm boundaries. I forwarded both responses to Dr. Wilson, who validated my approach and helped me prepare for potential escalation. That escalation came sooner than expected. 3 days after sending my conditions, I received a call from Uncle James. "Your father contacted me again," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He suggested that if I truly cared about your well-being, I would encourage you to invest in his business venture as a way of healing old wounds. When I refused, he implied he might need to set the record straight about certain aspects of your childhood at your wedding. The threat was clear. If I wouldn't provide financial support, my father would attempt to disrupt my wedding with accusations or embarrassing revelations. It was a desperate ploy from a desperate man, but it still sent a chill through me. "He won't be at the wedding," I said firmly. "Neither of them will." "I agree completely," Uncle James replied. "Stephanie and I have already spoken with the security team at the venue. They won't be allowed entry under any circumstances." The following week brought another attempt at manipulation when my mother showed up unannounced at my office building. Security prevented her from reaching my floor, but she left a handwritten note claiming she was in crisis and only needed a small loan to prevent eviction. The performative desperation, complete with smudged ink suggesting teardrops, might have moved me years ago. Now it only strengthened my resolve. Michael's support during this period proved invaluable. Unlike some partners who might have pressured me to reconcile with my parents for the sake of wedding appearances or family harmony, he fully backed my decision to maintain boundaries. "Family isn't about DNA," he reminded me one evening as we finalized our guest list. "It's about who shows up consistently with love and respect. Your parents forfeited that privilege 15 years ago. They don't get to reclaim it now just because it might benefit them." As our wedding approached, I worried that the shadow of my parents' manipulation might darken what should be a joyful time. Dr. Wilson suggested a symbolic ritual to help me process my feelings and reclaim my narrative. "Write letters to your parents expressing everything you wish you could say, all the hurt, anger, disappointment, and grief," she advised. "Then decide what to do with those letters in a way that feels healing. Some clients burn them, others keep them as a reminder of their journey, and others choose to actually send them." I wrote the letters over a weekend retreat with Katie, Zoe, and several other close friends who had stood by me through this difficult period. The process was cathartic, allowing me to articulate feelings I had suppressed for years while surrounded by people who truly loved me. In the end, I decided not to send the letters. My parents had already demonstrated they weren't capable of hearing my truth without twisting it to serve their narratives. Instead, I chose to read portions to Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie, who had earned the right to understand the depth of my experience. As I read, tears streamed down Aunt Stephanie's face, while Uncle James listened with a quiet intensity that betrayed his emotion. When I finished, they both embraced me. "I wish we could have protected you from this pain," Aunt Stephanie whispered. "But I'm so proud of the woman you've become despite it, because of it, even." Uncle James cleared his throat. "Your resilience amazes me every day. Watching you set boundaries with the people who hurt you most, it's one of the bravest things I've ever witnessed." Their words healed something deep within me. The abandoned child finally understood that she had been claimed by love far stronger than the biological connection that had failed her. During this period of emotional processing, I received an unexpected message from a cousin on my father's side, Haley Mitchell, whom I hadn't seen since childhood. She had apparently been told by my father that I was refusing contact despite his many attempts to reconcile over the years. His narrative portrayed him as the wounded party, repeatedly reaching out to an unforgiving daughter who had been poisoned against him by her wealthy adoptive family. Similar stories had apparently been circulated among extended family members on both sides, painting me as cold and ungrateful while presenting my parents as victims of circumstance who had done their best, given their limitations. Rather than allowing this false narrative to persist, I decided to reclaim my story. With support from Michael and my adoptive parents, I composed a factual, unemotional account of the abandonment and the recent contact attempts, which I shared with key family members on both sides. I included documentation, the original emails from my parents, their responses to my conditions, and the threatening messages they had sent subsequently. "I'm not sharing this to vilify anyone," I wrote in conclusion. "I'm sharing it because I deserve to have my experience acknowledged truthfully. For 15 years, I built a life without my parents' presence or support. I am open to reconciliation based on genuine remorse and changed behavior, but not to exploitation or manipulation." The response was overwhelming. Cousins, aunts, and uncles from both sides reached out with messages of support and apology for believing false narratives. Several revealed similar experiences with my parents' self-serving behavior over the years. Most touchingly, my father's sister Laura, who had distanced herself from him years ago for reasons I never understood, called to express her admiration for my boundaries. "He did the same thing to me when his business first failed," she confided. "Tried to guilt me into investing my husband's retirement savings in a sure-thing venture. When I refused, he spread rumors that I had abandoned him in his time of need. It took years to repair relationships with other family members who only heard his side. This outpouring of support and validation marked a turning point in my healing journey. By speaking my truth calmly and factually, I had reclaimed my narrative from those who sought to distort it. The 13-year-old girl who had been silenced by abandonment finally had her voice heard and believed. With the wedding just weeks away, I made a final decision regarding my parents. I would send them each a simple message. "I understand you're disappointed by my boundaries. I remain open to building a new relationship based on mutual respect if you choose to meet the conditions I've outlined. Regardless of your decision, I wish you well in your journey forward. I've found peace in mine. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. That would require genuine remorse and changed behavior on their part. But it was something equally powerful, indifference. Their presence or absence no longer defined me. Their approval or disappointment no longer mattered. I had taken control of my story, and in doing so, had finally freed myself from the emotional prison of abandonment. The weight that lifted with this realization was almost physical. As Michael noted with a smile, "You're standing taller these days." Indeed, I was no longer bent under the burden of unresolved trauma, but fully upright in my truth and worth. The parents who had once discarded me as an inconvenient burden had returned hoping to exploit me as a valuable resource. In refusing to be used, I had completed the journey from victim to victor. My wedding day dawned clear and perfect, one of those rare October days when summer's warmth lingers while fall's colors paint the landscape in gold and crimson. As I stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, Aunt Stephanie adjusting my veil while Katie and Zoe fussed with my train, I felt a profound sense of peace that had seemed impossible just months earlier. "You look radiant," Aunt Stephanie said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Truly a vision. The elegant gown, ivory satin with delicate lace overlay, had been carefully selected not just for its beauty, but for what it represented, a fresh beginning unburdened by the past. Around my neck hung a pendant that had belonged to Aunt Stephanie's grandmother, fulfilling both the something old and something borrowed traditions while symbolizing the family bonds that had sustained me. When Uncle James appeared at the door to escort me down the aisle, his momentary speechlessness spoke volumes. As he offered his arm, he whispered, "I've never been prouder than I am at this moment, watching the remarkable woman you've become." Walking toward Michael, who waited beneath an arch of autumn flowers, I scanned the gathered faces, friends who had supported me through difficult times, colleagues who had become mentors, extended family members who had chosen truth over comfortable falsehoods. The absence of my biological parents created no void. Rather, the space was filled completely by authentic connections built on respect, consistency, and genuine care. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion, Michael's voice steady as he recited vows he had written himself, my own words emerging clearer and stronger than I had expected. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause that erupted felt like a collective affirmation of the family we were creating, one built on choice rather than obligation. At the reception, Aunt Stephanie delivered a toast that moved many to tears. Family, she began, is not defined by blood, but by who shows up day after day, in moments of celebration and in times of challenge. It's built through consistent acts of love, respect, and support. Avery and Michael understand this profound truth, and the family they create together will be all the stronger for it. Uncle James followed with his own tribute. 15 years ago, Stephanie and I were given an unexpected gift when Avery came into our lives. What began as a temporary arrangement became the greatest blessing we could have imagined. Watching her overcome adversity with grace, establish healthy boundaries with courage, and choose love without compromising her worth has been the privilege of our lifetime. Michael, you're gaining not just a wife, but a partner whose capacity for resilience and genuine love knows no bounds. As the evening progressed, filled with dancing, laughter, and the kind of joyful celebration that can only emerge from authentic connection, I found moments to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The abandoned 13-year-old could never have imagined this future, yet every painful step had somehow led to this moment of completeness. After returning from our honeymoon, 2 restorative weeks in the Greek islands, Michael and I settled into our new home, a spacious apartment closer to my adoptive parents, but still within the city. Life began to establish its new rhythms, with Sunday dinners at Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie's home now including Michael as a beloved family member rather than just my partner. Approximately a month after our return, I received an unexpected message from my mother. Unlike her previous communications, this one contained no emotional manipulation or thinly veiled requests for financial assistance. Instead, it simply informed me that she had begun therapy as I had suggested and was discovering uncomfortable truths about her patterns of behavior. I don't expect this to change anything between us immediately, she wrote. I understand that trust requires consistent action over time. I just wanted you to know that I'm taking your conditions seriously and doing the work required, regardless of whether reconciliation is possible. The message concluded with congratulations on my marriage and an acknowledgement that her absence from the wedding had been appropriate given our current relationship status. For the first time, her words seemed to center my experience rather than her desires or needs. Dr. Wilson, with whom I still had monthly check-ins, suggested viewing this development with cautious optimism rather than cynical dismissal or naive acceptance. Following her advice, I sent a brief, civil response acknowledging my mother's efforts and reiterating my openness to gradual reconnection if her changed behavior proved consistent over time. My father's reaction followed a different trajectory. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact me directly following the wedding, each message increasingly hostile and accusatory, he apparently sought other targets for his manipulation. Laura called to warn me that he had been approaching various family members with a business prospectus, using my name as a supposed silent partner to lend credibility to his venture. With Uncle James's guidance, I had my attorney send a cease and desist letter prohibiting him from using my name or implying my involvement in any business dealings. The legal action prompted a final, bitter email accusing me of ultimate betrayal and declaring that I was dead to him. Ironically, the same phrase he had reportedly used about me to relatives during the 15 years of his absence. Rather than causing pain, his declaration of disownment brought an unexpected sense of closure. The father who had abandoned me was now abandoning me again, but this time the choice was mine. I had established boundaries he couldn't respect, and his departure was the natural consequence of his own behavior rather than a reflection of my worth. In contrast to these complex family dynamics, my professional life continued to flourish. 6 months after our wedding, I was offered a promotion at Crawford & Associates, leading a new division focused on socially responsible investment strategies for high-net-worth clients. The role aligned perfectly with values instilled by both Uncle James's business acumen and Aunt Stephanie's philanthropic vision, allowing me to merge profit with purpose in meaningful ways. Michael's career similarly advanced as he took on greater responsibilities in his family's sustainable energy company, focusing particularly on expanding access to green technology in underserved communities. Our shared commitment to using privilege and position for positive impact became a cornerstone of our relationship, sparking passionate discussions over dinner and collaborative projects that bridged our professional spheres. It was during this period of professional growth and personal stability that we received news that would shift our perspective yet again. I was pregnant with our first child. The discovery prompted deep reflection on family patterns and parental responsibility. As I shared the news with Uncle James and Aunt Stephanie, their joy was tinged with a new dimension of meaning. They would become grandparents to a child who would carry forward their values, if not their DNA. This child will never question their worth or place in our family, I promised during the announcement dinner, my hand protectively covering my still flat stomach. The cycle stops with us. Uncle James raised his glass. To new beginnings and better patterns. To family by choice and by love. As my pregnancy progressed, I continued the cautious, limited contact with my mother that had begun after her therapeutic journey. During our first carefully structured meeting, a lunch with Aunt Stephanie present as both support and buffer, I observed subtle but significant changes in her demeanor. The performative emotionality had been replaced by a more authentic presence, and she listened more than she spoke, a reversal of previous patterns. When I mentioned my pregnancy near the end of our meeting, her reaction further evidenced her evolving perspective. Rather than immediately claiming grandmother privileges or making the news about her feelings, she simply offered congratulations and asked thoughtful questions about my health and preparation plans. I hope someday to know this child in whatever capacity you deem appropriate, she said as we prepared to leave. But I understand that will depend entirely on my continued work and your comfort level. I've learned that relationships aren't entitlements, but privileges earned through consistent care and respect. The statement, so different from her earlier entitled approach, suggested that perhaps genuine change was possible, even if complete healing of our relationship might never be. We established a pattern of monthly lunches, always with clear boundaries and usually with a supportive third party present. While not the traditional mother-daughter relationship many enjoy, it offered a measure of resolution that had once seemed impossible. As my due date approached, Michael and I prepared our home and hearts for the profound responsibility of parenthood. During one particularly meaningful evening, as we arranged books in the nursery we had created, I found myself sharing reflections on my journey with him. I used to think being abandoned by my parents was the worst thing that could happen to me, I admitted, running my hand along the spines of children's books selected with love. Now I see it differently. Their absence created space for people who truly wanted to be present, Uncle James, Aunt Stephanie, you. And their return, as painful as it was, allowed me to reclaim my narrative and establish boundaries that will protect not just me but our child as well. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most painful experiences create the most important growth. You learn to recognize authentic love because you experienced its opposite. And I learned that family isn't automatic, I added. It's built through consistent acts of care, respect, and showing up when it matters. That's what will give our child, not perfect parenting, but unwavering presence. When our daughter arrived in early spring, healthy, vocal, and alert, we named her Grace Stephanie Reynolds, honoring the woman who had mothered me when my biological mother couldn't or wouldn't. Watching Uncle James hold her for the first time, his normally composed expression transformed by wonder, completed a circle of healing I hadn't known needed closing. From the moment you came into our lives, you expanded our understanding of family, he whispered, gently rocking his granddaughter. And now she does the same. What an extraordinary gift you've given us. The truth of his words resonated deeply. My journey from abandoned child to confident woman, from victim to advocate, from wounded daughter to empowered mother had never been about forgetting the past, but about transforming it into wisdom that could serve the future. As I watch Grace grow, I am conscious of the legacy I'm creating, not one of perfect parenting or absence of struggle, but of presence, accountability, and unconditional love that doesn't waver when circumstances become difficult. Every time I choose patience over convenience, every time I validate her feelings even when they're uncomfortable, every time I demonstrate healthy boundaries in my own relationships, I'm breaking cycles that once seemed inevitable. My mother continues her journey of growth, slowly earning limited but meaningful contact with her granddaughter through consistent demonstration of changed behavior. My father remains absent by his own choice, unable to accept the terms of healthy relationship I established. Both realities are acknowledged honestly with appropriate context as Grace grows old enough to understand. The story I once feared would define me, being the girl whose parents didn't want her, has instead become just one chapter in a much richer narrative about finding family in unexpected places, creating boundaries that protect rather than punish, and transforming abandonment into the foundation for authentic connection. If you're watching this and struggling with similar wounds, whether from family rejection, betrayal by those who should have protected you, or the painful return of people who once walked away, please know that your story isn't finished yet. The people who couldn't love you properly don't determine your worth. The boundaries you establish aren't selfish, but necessary for healing. And the family you build through choice and commitment can be more nurturing than the one you were born into. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Have you had to establish boundaries with family members? How have you defined family in your own life? Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else feel less alone in their journey. Thank you for listening to mine. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing with others who might need to hear that abandonment doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a more authentic one. I'm so grateful for this community and the support we can offer each other as we navigate life's most challenging relationships. Until next time, remember that you are worthy of consistent love and respect, regardless of who failed to provide it in the past.